Good evening, and warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Children, Families and Education Select Committee. My name is Councillor Heena Makwana and I'm the chair of this committee. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts, and when you are invited to speak, please ensure you turn your microphones on so that you can be heard in the recording. For those watching via YouTube, if you're so minded, you can complete one of our resident feedback forms. These can be found in the information section underneath the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us improve the way that we run our meetings. Okay, before we go through our agenda, I'd like to introduce colleagues in the room. So to my right is Councillors Haggart, Smallwood and Cawthorne. To my left is Ryan Dell, our Democratic Services Officer. Then further on is Councillor Sweeting, Core, Gill and Mr Tony Little. Presenting this evening are Nav Minas, Abby Preston and Dan Kennedy. So welcome to you all. Okay, agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Batt with Councillor Cawthorne substituting, and apologies from Councillor Judge with Councillor Core substituting.
Okay, many thanks, Councillor Cawthorne and Councillor Core for subbing this evening. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. Are there any? No, great. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th of June. Can we agree? Thank you. Agenda item 4, to confirm that the items of business marked as part 1 will be considered in public and that the items marked as part 2 will be considered in private. There are no part 2 items. So we are straight on to agenda item 5, which is the twice yearly school place planning. So before I hand over to officers, I just want to acknowledge that school place planning is certainly not an easy task. We recognise that there's a great deal of movement and fluctuation in the data. However, as the committee receives this report twice yearly rather than 4 times, we think it's really important that we hear and receive this report this evening. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I'll give a sort of brief introduction, and I'm going to hand over to Nav, who will walk you through some of the specifics, and we'll be very happy then to answer any questions from committee. So this is obviously the scheduled twice yearly update to committee. And in broad terms, the forecast need for school places is in line with recent year forecasts. So we're not seeing huge swings, and as the Chair said, it can be challenging for all sorts of reasons that are outside the control of the Council. But broadly speaking, we're seeing the need pretty much as predicted. And in broad terms, if I just give a very brief summary and then hand over to Nav, we are seeing a gradual reduction in primary school need, but due to parental preference there, the spare places or surplus places tend to cluster in a small number or minority of schools. At secondary level, pretty much as predicted, we are seeing demand pretty high and rising, and again that reflects well over a decade of rising pupil numbers in the borough. So in other words, in everyday speak, it's working its way through and will continue to do so. A real challenge for us, as it is for many other boroughs, is the rise in demand from children with additional needs, and meeting that need is obviously a partnership that we are working with parents, carers, schools to best meet that need. So at this point, I'll hand over to Nav, who will walk us through the primary, secondary phases, and also then talk about where we're at with special educational needs, and then we're very happy to take questions from committee.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Exactly as you've said, but with regards to the report, we have obviously a statutory duty to ensure that there is sufficiency of places. I can walk you through the primary, secondary trends. That's absolutely fine, but as Dan has mentioned, the primary age pupil roll overall continues to show a gradual decline, and we've seen this in the termly census returns since January 2019. However, this particular January, we've actually seen an increase of pupils recorded. But however, there has been an overall decline, and we work as officers have been working very closely with schools to review possible published admissions numbers and reductions as well to support our schools. Not mentioned in the report is something that we will be confirming in the autumn term, would be the proposal to consult for PAN reductions. With regards to secondary numbers, I would like to say that there was a typo in the third page, and I would like to bring that to the attention of members of the committee. It should have been a total number of pupils within the secondary phase is expected to see an increase in demand as an overall number in the next 4 years, not with regards to year 7 pupils. So I do apologise about that. In actual fact, the peak is actually September 23 for our year 7 projections. So we have agreed with our secondary colleagues to bulge classes of 101 extra places this year, and that should be sufficient to accommodate any late applications. And with regards to specialist provision, again, year on year, I think colleagues have come to this committee to say that we are full to capacity, and we are working very closely with the DFE, with our specialist providers to increase that provision in the next few years to accommodate the growth. But happy to take any additional comments or questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Because I can't see the light on there. Okay, so before I hand over to members for questions, I just want to remind members that we do have a 2 questions protocol, so you're entitled to ask 2 questions, and we'll go around the room to ensure everyone gets a chance to ask their questions. Also, can I request that we keep our questions succinct, please, to make sure that we actually get through what we need to get through. Okay, on that note, who would like to kick off? Thank you, Councillor Sweeting.
It's a simple question. Why aren't we going for a new secondary school? Because we have a very tight fit between the numbers still in our primary sector and the number of places that you have in year 7. I mean, thank you very much for the audit of pupil numbers from January. I think that really shows that we have far below 5%, which is considered to be a reasonable amount, which Department for Education considers to be really the minimum. And we're accepting 8% for our primaries, but we're accepting maybe even below 4% for our secondaries. And this has real implications for some areas of the borough. So, in simple terms, why aren't we going for a new secondary school?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Sweeting. I've been involved in school places planning for sort of 15 years now, and the biggest challenge in this borough is obviously finding a site that's suitable and in the right place. And actually, we're confident as officers and working with schools that we can meet that need, and we can see that it will be working its way through and will be dropping. So, again, we have to apply a value for money as well as a practical planning, sort of town and country planning perspective. To build a new secondary school would cost tens and tens of millions now, and so we're confident we can meet the need. So we will, of course, keep that forecast closely under review, and if it does rise and it shows that we haven't got enough places, then officers will recommend to members a very different commissioning model.
But it doesn't allow wiggle room. It doesn't allow move-ins. It doesn't allow move-ins to the borough to have a good amount of schools that they can actually apply for. I mean, I don't know how tight this has been really since 2014. So I come back again. The numbers are increasing in the primary. Year 2 is up to more capacity than you've got in year 7. So I do think you need to at least look again at the secondary issue, and you have got a site, you have mentioned the site for a secondary school.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you very much. This takes me back. I'm going to try and be succinct in view of what you said. I'm grateful to Councillor Sweeting because she's actually asked a variation on what one of my questions would have been around another secondary school. I would say that I think officers should be congratulated on managing what we know is an extraordinarily challenging area of service. And I think the holy grail, if there is one in this area of service, is surely a school to state that allows for maximum flexibility for the ebbs and flows of numbers, as we know they do. So I suppose my question, and I'll come to it, and then there's another quick one. Well done. Well done. The question is really how we're working with schools to make sure that they can manage those ebbs and flows and support them through those changes. That's my first question, if that's okay.
So officers do liaise with schools on a very regular basis to look at their census data, and obviously other conversations do come into it. Colleagues are concerned about finances and resources and how that affects the provision at school. We do support them with PAN reductions going forward. As the admissions authority for our community schools, we would lead on those consultations, and it's something that is a 2-year process, so we do work very closely with our schools. And we do, with regards to expansions, we are constantly reviewing our school's estate as well, to ensure that if there are any other options, that they are also discussed as well to support our schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you want to follow up?
No, well, a different question actually.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Just taking a step back from all this and looking at the big picture, we hear all the time, and certainly this seems to be the case anecdotally, the further you go into London, we're hearing about falling school rolls, we're hearing about schools falling. Do we have any sense of what is happening out there, whether there's likely to be any change? Is that likely to afflict us significantly in outer London boroughs? What are our thoughts on that, please?
I mean, thank you, Councillor Cawthorne. I mean, it's obviously a tricky area in which to sort of forecast the future. What I would say is that certainly the pandemic and before that Brexit has had an impact about some of the choices that parents are making about where they live in the country and in the borough. I mean, well, as you know, we're a very buoyant borough, being in outer London. We have a strong economy compared to other parts of London. Relatively high employment levels, and so therefore we are a borough of choice for many families. And as you know, we've got great facilities, great open spaces, great environment, so it's a place where families want to come. So for me, I'm not seeing huge swings or huge risks. We are seeing the birth rate slow slightly. Okay, and that's consistent with other parts of the country and London, but who knows, that may change in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Cole.
Thank you. I just wanted to know that we have gone from importers at Year 7 intake to net exporters due to parental preference. So most of our kids are now going out. And it says that there would be time where there would be risk that fewer Hillingdon pupils may be able to secure places out of borough because they have their own pressures and they might not be able to take it. And historically, it's especially because the parents want their kids to go to the schools with better standards. So how are we in the borough helping the schools to be competitive and be at the standards where kids choose these areas for their first preference? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We work really closely with our schools, and we have a really good standard of education and Ofsted outcomes across the borough. So it's not an area that we're particularly concerned around in general around sort of weaknesses in our schools. We've got a partnership model that we've developed recently over the past year where we're working really closely not only with our maintained schools but with our academy schools as well. And our education advisors are continually monitoring and supporting. So we're looking at the sort of bigger picture as to how we can support with data outcomes and trends that we're seeing. So there's a lot of work that takes place. But in general, I'd say that our schools are really strong as far as the quality of education that they provide. but we continue to sort of monitor that and ensure we target any schools where that may not be the case.
So what happens when few of Hillingdon pupils secure places out of Borough and there are still more people left, despite the standards you're saying? So what's going to happen? Do we have a plan B for them? Is there a cushion where we can take all those pupils back in the Borough schools? As you said, new school is not likely and standards are all right. Then what happens to those kids in the future?
Thank you. So in terms of our sort of forecasting, we always play a sort of a number of sort of what-if scenarios. So that allows us to then look at what I would describe as, I don't want to get too technical, but tolerances. So we look at what would happen if it went up another 2%, 3%. And so as has been highlighted, we've got a kind of a capacity of 4% in the system. But we also can, it's within our gift, is to ask schools, should the need rise in year, to take extra pupils, and we have an in-year fair access protocol. So it's an agreement of partnership working with schools to ensure that all children are offered a school place. But we do forecast for what-if scenarios, and we do accommodate for that. So, and it would be very unusual, clearly not impossible, but very unusual to see very sudden big swings unexpectedly.
Thank you. Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions really on this. I know it's a real hard role, so I think actually out of all the committees, this one's quite hard when you've got a preempty. But what I was wondering was, do we have, I'm sure we do, but what is our emergency procedure, and do we look at a more of a flexible learning system as well, that we can, if it became really urgent and we couldn't get the school place, that we could learn from home virtually and they could go into school, to secure up some of that space? I don't know. I mean, it might be impossible, but thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, we have sort of some capacity in the system. So, for example, we know of some schools which have the classroom space, if I put it like that, but they're not using them all. So in terms of our sort of contingency, we would ask those schools to simply open up those classrooms, open up another year group, and then the challenge would obviously be to get supply teachers very quickly. But so that's our kind of contingency in some senses. We know of schools in the borough where there is mobile or temporary accommodation which could be used as classrooms very, very quickly. So we've kind of got contingencies on school sites in the school estate, so we don't foresee, I suppose, that there might be a need for at-home tuition or something like that. As we've built some of that, we know our estates quite well, and we know where some of what we could switch on quite quickly with some of the partnership working that we have with secondary schools.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good to hear, so I'm really pleased. And I think as well, like we were saying, if the classroom's empty, could always use that as online to connect to a school that's teaching that subject, which is what I was thinking. And the other thing actually is just back to nursery and primary, and obviously we've seen a complete opposite here, so we've seen a much lower number. I just wondered why that was. Is it because culturally parents are now sending their children later? Is it because of the nurseries as well? Because obviously they get 30 hours, don't they, and it's only a morning or an afternoon for most parents. So are we seeing them putting into private nurseries because they're getting the full 30? And if so, is there anything that we can do to shift to accommodate that, and move sort of with the times as well? I don't know. Again, just a question.
I mean, some of it's, I suppose, down to sort of family choice and working patterns. Many parents, carers will naturally choose a sort of childcare facility, a nursery, very close to their work, or sometimes on site with their employer. So, and that's why sometimes, the children, the little ones, aren't always in the system, so to speak, in terms of sort of school place planning, and then they present in reception. So, but what we do though is we look at sort of GP. We look for reference data, like number of GP registrations, children under certain age. We work very closely with the public health team, and health services. So we build up a sort of rounded intelligence. I mean, it's not future-proofing, but it does give us sort of a greater sense of confidence about the numbers of children under the age of 4 or 5 who are actually living in the borough today. I mean, those parents could still choose schools outside the borough or move away at the time of reception. So it's, like I said, it's not foolproof in that sense, but it gives us a sense about what's going on. But yeah, I suppose in many senses it really depends on sort of individual family circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Little.
Thank you. Can you advise me about high needs children? Are they continuing to grow at a faster rate than the overall numbers? And the follow-up question is, how much extra capacity do we need for special schools and special units within ordinary schools over and above what's been indicated to us in previous documents for planning purposes?
Thank you for your question. The level of need is definitely increasing everywhere nationally, and what we've seen in Hillingdon is we were above national levels with EHCPs and high needs by some way a few years ago, and it's now closing, so we're now in line with national. So we're slowing that demand. We're doing a lot of work, as I'm sure you're aware, around high needs and supporting effectively and making the best use of resources. So the demand is growing, but I think one of the things that we need to look at is around the culture of the environments that we put our children in, to make sure that our mainstream schools are as inclusive as they can be and can meet as many needs as possible around high needs, but that we also have the appropriate amount of provision for specialist placements. And that, to us, involves a sort of graduated approach. So we've got mainstream schools, we've got SRPs, and we've got designated units, and then we also have the special school provision. And what we've been doing as a borough is growing that offer as a graduated approach. So instead of just focusing just on the special school places, also looking at supporting inclusion in mainstream and the SRPs and the designated units, as well as an assessment base. So we've got a real range of provision. As far as meeting demand, it's a challenging one, because we're looking at projections around numbers, and we're also looking at how we can sort of change our practice and our culture to make sure that we're meeting needs in every possible way. But there's a lot of growth in the system that we've got planned that's being undertaken at the moment. So we've got a number of new SRPs opening and designated units. We've got a number of new special schools as well. So our demand should match our provision based on what we're seeing. We may need a little bit more as far as specialist school places, but we're not looking to, in an ideal world, build lots of new special schools. I think looking at the needs profile that we have at the moment and the projects that we've got in the system, we're getting to a good place around the places that we'll have available.
When you say a little bit more, would you like to try and quantify that for me?
Yes, so we have a number of projects going on at the moment, so around 2025 to 2026. We should see a significant increase in the special school places that we have available. I don't have an exact total number for you, but it should be roughly about, 30% more than what we currently have on offer at the moment, roughly. And we need to look at our projections along with the SRP developments that we have. So we're going to have a significant increase in the amount of SRP places over the next few years as well, to see whether that's, based on our projections, about right.
Thank you. I'll come round again. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. Probably not for this meeting, but I wonder in a future meeting we could have a bit of information about how the projections are made pre the receptions. Obviously, you know how many young people you are, but for my simple mind, how do you get around to working out how many babies people are going to have? And I think it'd be an interesting bit of work to actually hear in this committee, like to scrutinise that and understand how that projection's done. And that leads me on to my question. If a new secondary school is needed, then absolutely we should build it. One of my concerns is that we are seeing a peak, but coming up behind 7 years behind is actually a slowing down. So we could end up building this lovely new shiny school, and then in 8 years' time we're all sitting here and there's no one to go to it, right? Which is not something we want. So I guess is that what we're seeing, and then that is why we're maybe exercising a little bit of extra caution ahead of building a school if we need it.
That's absolutely right. We've got to be clearly accountable for the use of public funds, but not just that. It's also clearly the space in the borough that would take up, and it might require us to reduce the open space available to residents. So it is about, if I'm being, everyday expression, sweating the assets and making sure that we're making the best use of the education estate before officers make recommendations for new schools.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
And then I just wondered if in future documents would it be possible to have a sort of a breakdown of percentage of capacity and how much the percentage of the capacity is that's being uptaken? Because at the moment I had to sit with my calculator and try and work out where it was. Now you can kind of get it, but it'd be good to see where our shortfall is in the borough and where our demand is. Just would that be possible in?
We would be delighted to share that detail with you.
Thank you very, very much.
And it all exists.
I'm sure it does. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Chair. My question is regarding move-ins into the borough, because I'm very sympathetic to them, because I was one many years ago. But I was fortunate enough to carry on going to my old school, which was 6 minutes on the new Elizabeth line, but back then it was the Great Western, I think it was. So there's a few move-ins that I met recently who are struggling to find spaces in the borough, and they're having to still venture out to their schools in Ealing, Hounslow, even further out. I was just wondering, could the officers paint a picture of what the difficulties are at the moment accommodating move-ins into the borough? And am I correct in assuming that the fair access panel is being used more and more for certain year groups? Thank you.
So just to everyone's benefit, we have this in-year fair access protocol, which is where we have it's a group that meets regularly, chaired by a head teacher. And so when we receive school place applications and say a year group is full, then schools have all signed up to a protocol, which is they will work together to meet the need to ensure all children are offered a school place. I wouldn't say that we're seeing anything that's particularly different, or have it done in the last academic year that's particularly different to previous years. Sometimes it can depend upon a particular year group or a particular geography, so it might feel like a pressure, but actually we can still meet that need, but it does require children to be offered a place which may not be their closest school. And so we are obliged to offer school places to offer places at a school where there are places available before we go into the in-year fair access protocol. And sometimes we offer places, but they get declined by parents and carers because they prefer another school, or sometimes the children will continue to attend the original school while waiting for a place to become available at their preferred school. So it isn't that we're not meeting need, it's perhaps we're not always meeting the preference.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Yes, can I make a comment first about a comment that one of the officers said about standards? We in this committee put forward some comments from our standards report, which express concern over various stages compared to other London boroughs and statistical neighbours. So I would just reference that. When it comes to I'll go back to the issue of wriggle room in our schools and our secondary schools, and there's not a lot of it. And I was particularly interested in the large cohort that's coming through at the moment, Year 6 cohort going into Year 7. It's over 200 extra from the capacity at Year 7. So we obviously lost a lot between Year 6 and 7. So my main question is, how is the admissions to our Year 7 going? What are the numbers that have turned up at Year 7, and how many? What is the percentage of unfilled places? Is it still lower than 5%?
Thank
you, Councillor Sweeting. So with regards to our PAN for September 23, we were taking into consideration the expansion at Hillingdon. That's 1.5 FE, which is going to open this autumn, and the 101 place bulge as well that we've got in the bulge classes in our 4 schools that agreed to that this year. We had a total of, so this is not capacity, this is PAN, 3,823. Sorry, 3,823. From the residents that have been offered a place, that's a total of 3,626. 537 of those are going out of Borough. We're importing 401. That's a total of, surplus of 333 places, so that's 8.7% as of National Offer Day, and we anticipate that that will allow for any of the late applications that we get until September.
Right, so of those that have been offered places, there will be some that won't have got any of their preferences. So what are the numbers looking like? Because I think last year it was 7 forms of entry, about 210, that didn't get any of their preferences, and most of those are in the south of the borough. So it would be interesting to see that pattern.
Sorry, I don't have that number on me now, but I absolutely can bring that back.
Yeah, thank you, Nav. I was just going to ask if you can also share that data that you just read out, perhaps, to Ryan, and then that can be shared with the committee. That would be great. Thank you. I just have a question myself around bulge classes, and just kind of the impact that bulge classes have on schools and our children and young people. Have we got any idea on that?
I mean, in terms of the bulge classes, they're always agreed with schools, and schools will always organise their timetable and teaching and standard of teaching in accordance with that bulge class. So that actually they just readjust their timetable. So we've never had any issues or concerns raised, and there's nothing that would suggest there has been any sort of impact on standards or access to sporting facilities and so on.
Thank you. Councillor Kaur.
Thank you again, Chair. I just wanted to know if we could get a list of all the schools that have offered bulge places, and if it was also possible to have a list of all the special schools with the capacity, and if we're building new ones, the time scale for their completion, please. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kaur, can I just ask what's the reason for that request for the bulge places in particular?
Basically, then if we are able to map up how, as you asked, how the bulge classes are affecting, or how students are being affected, or how it's affecting the teachers, if we can see where these are, or those are the schools, and then we can see the effect if there is. So if you have a list of schools, then probably it's easier to monitor those and then actually figure out what you wanted to find out in the first place, that how is it affecting.
Okay, yeah, if that data is available, that would be great, thank you. Mr. Little, I'm coming back round to you.
Thank you. I want to stick with this high needs business, because the impression I gained from reading the Cabinet papers is that we're spending more on high needs than we budgeted for already this year, even though we've only got to month 2 reporting. And you seem to be reasonably confident that the building programme that you've got underway is enough to pretty well meet the demand that you're expecting. But I find it hard to reconcile with our continued ability to underestimate the amount that we spend on special needs, with optimism on capacity. And perhaps you could set my mind at rest on that.
So in terms of best meeting the needs of children with additional needs, providing additional capacity in state-funded schools is one part of the strategy. There's so much more to that strategy, which is actually about, importantly, developing the capabilities, the capacity in mainstream schools as well, early intervention, early support, which allows children to flourish in mainstream schools. So in other words, by changing that practice, it means then that we start to bend the forecast high numbers downwards, those children who need a special school, and it means, importantly, that we reduce the need for highest cost placements as well. So in other words, we're starting to, the plan over the next 3 to 5 years is to step down the higher cost placements heading towards mainstream. So providing more support to mainstream schools to have a much broader diversity of needs, more inclusion, and then, exactly as Abby said, we're accelerating the programme for additional support in mainstream schools, designated units, as well as special needs school places, all helping to avoid or prevent higher numbers in the most highest cost schools, generally independent schools, and so therefore having a positive impact. So in terms of the programme we've got, we're confident that that's possible. We've done lots of site feasibilities. The DOV are also delivering a programme, and we're in regular contact and review about that programme as well. We're not saying it's easy, by the way, but we're confident in our programme.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you. I wasn't sure I'll use my 2 questions, but thank you anyway, because I'll just ask one this time, if I may. And that's in relation to the point that was made earlier about a small-ish number of schools that have spare places, and I think there was a comment made to the effect that, well, effectively parents vote with their feet, and that results in that situation arising. I just wonder to what extent, as a local authority, given that most of these schools are independent entities, to what extent are we able to work with them to address perhaps some of the issues that are giving rise to these perceptions that perhaps they're a destination to be avoided, if you like, to use up some of that capacity? Is that something we're able to do, or not, or what? Out of interest.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a good question. So we work really closely with our schools to try and encourage parents through the door and to change those perceptions. We also, our admissions officers work really closely in partnership with parents as well to understand, what the options are and break down some of those barriers. So there's a lot of work that goes on around that. And sometimes the impression that parents may have about a school, there may not be the evidence to support it at that moment in time as to why they feel that way. So we try to look at opportunities for them to uncover as to where their child could really benefit going to those schools and try and help alleviate those concerns that they may have. So there's a lot of partnership working that goes on to support that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I can't see anyone indicate. Oh, Councillor Sweeting.
I have a few, but I think maybe through you, Chair, I can put them down and share them with you to see whether the officers can provide information later.
Yep, with these additional questions to the one that you've already passed on.
And there are a few extras coming from what's been said this evening.
Okay, sure. Yes, that's fine. Anyone else? Great. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Yeah, I'm sure you will have further updates from you as well. So, thank you. Okay, agenda item 6 then is the forward plan. Ryan, was there anything on the forward plan? No, or was the work programme?
I don't think it's
no. Anyone else on the forward plan? Any comments? Right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sweeting.
It's where are we with the SEND strategy? It's not going to Cabinet, and it's not part of our work programme. So where is it? In the ether somewhere.
Okay, so the SEND strategy is it's expected now in August rather than in July. I think in the papers it's listed for July. It's now on the updated one. It's listed for August.
So will it come to us before Cabinet?
I believe it already came to us in November. But I can check on that. So I think comments were submitted on that in November time. But
Yeah,
I can check that.
Yeah. Agenda item 7 then is our work programme. Any questions or comments? Or no? Yes, Councillor Sweeting.
Can we start thinking about the new review, major review? And also, I mean, there are lots of interesting points that our officers made concerning school places. I would suggest on a one-off information item and exactly how our school places and our projections are used, how it all comes together. Because I know when I was an officer dealing with this, I know what I used to do, but I don't know how it works now within the officer group. And there's also the issue of how our school improvement team is working. You know, that would be an interesting one, because again, that's standard, that's linked to what we were saying in the past, you know, exactly the teams, because there were so many teams that were listed in that report. It would be good to know how they sort of interlock.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good. Yes, we can request that. Mr. Little, are you indicating?
Well, I was going to ask more or less the same question about the next review topic, because it's not on the work programme.
No, yeah. I think we're just waiting for the final conclusions and the recommendations. But yes, of course, like I said last meeting, we certainly can start thinking about the next review topic, of course. Okay, right, so I think that brings our meeting to a close. The next meeting is in September on the 19th. So thank you everybody for your questions and comments this evening, and have a good evening. Thank you.